All right, welcome to Artful Tuesdays. Today we have special guests, Ciccolella and Jeff Britting, the creators of Anthem the Play, an off-Broadway show done a couple years ago. Anne was the director and Jeff was the adapter. This is, of course, based on Ayn Rand's novella, Anthem. And today we are going to be discussing El Cid by Corneille. This is one of the Discovering Great Plays by Dr. Leonard Peikoff, something that we very much recommend. We're going to give you a plot synopsis and a discussion of the story, as well as a discussion of how to enjoy this story as great drama. So if you have not read the play, if you haven't, that's okay. Stick around, try it out. We hope to inspire you to go read the play, and especially go check out Peikoff's lecture and book series. So let's get rolling. Anne, well, hi, Jeff and Anne, by the way. Hello.
Hey, Kirk.
Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And you're going to start us off with a synopsis. So why don't we get started with El Cid, Corneille. What is this story about?
Thank you so much. So let me say to everybody, El Cid is a movie with Charlton Heston. Don't watch it.
What did I say, El Cid?
This is called, it's okay, we're going to say, we're going to
I forgot.
This is called Le Cid.
Le Cid.
And it is by a French classicist called Corneille. And we'll talk later about what that means, pro and con. But let me say that there are two main characters, Chimène, and she is in love with the hero, Rodrigue, which looks like Rodriguez, he is actually Le Cid. So it starts out with they're in love. It seems that they're going to get married, and their fathers are in agreement. That's how the setup is. But her father wants to be chosen to be the prince's tutor, and he is not. Rodrigue's father is chosen to be the
It's a place of high honor.
Tutor.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And therefore, there is an argument between Chimène's father and Rodrigue's father, and Chimène's father insults Rodrigue's father, and his honor is tainted. So he goes to his son, Rodrigue, and says, I have this problem. I need somebody to defend my honor because I'm an old man. And Chimène's father's a bit younger. And he agrees. Le Cid Rodrigue agrees to duel with Chimène's father, and he does duel, and he wins. So that's the setup. He kills her father. This is not good.
He kills his lover's father. Yeah.
Correct.
That's a bad
I love
thing.
that Leonard,
just so everybody knows, don't kill your lover's father.
Calls him her sweetheart, which I thought was really sweet, because they're not really lovers, they're sweethearts.
Yeah.
Anyway, Chimène pleads with the king to kill Rodrigue. So I'm going to call him Rod.
Mm-hmm.
So Rod does meet with her secretly in her house. We can talk about that later, because some people think that's a little sexy. And he says, look, I will kill myself. I offer you my life. I'll, run myself through the store and I'll cut my head off. You killed me. And she refuses to kill him and tells him that she does love him, but she has this problem with the honor that he has brought. He's breached her honor by killing her father. So the next big event really is there is an attack on Seville. There's an impending attack. Rodrigue gets folks together, and with a great sense of exuberance, he says, I'm going to go attack the Moors and as proving my love. And this is a big moment, and this is why he's called Le Cid, the leader, the Lord. And he does, in fact, defeat the Moors, and he returns to Chimène, but she thinks he was actually killed in the battle, and she faints, and we know that she's still in love with him. But when she learns he is alive, she again demands revenge for her father's death. And the king does allow her to choose a champion to fight Rodrigue for her hand in marriage. And that's really Act 5, right? So Rodrigue says goodbye to her. He goes to duel to his death. And his opponent actually returns to the court. Chemin again thinks he's killed. Rodrigue is killed, but he is not. He won the duel, but he spared his opponent. And the king urges Chemin to pardon Rodrigue. And the king gives her a year's grace before he says she has to marry Rodrigue in accordance with the terms of the duel. So it has a sort of ambiguous ending. So that's all I'll say about plot. I'm sure there's other stuff that you guys want to say, but I just wanted to give you a quick sketch.
No, that's great. That was wonderful. And I just, maybe to clarify a few things. One is, so there is the confusion of Le Cid and El Cid. And it's, so if I could just add that, I don't think it's just that it's the movie. I've never seen the movie. The play is based on a mythical figure in Spanish history called El Cid, and that's the Spanish. And but it was a Frenchman, Corneille, in the early 1600s, I think 1630s, that wrote the play. And of course, in French, it's Le Cid. So if you're looking for the play, you want to look for Le Cid Corneille. But there is this figure, and you could see sculptures all over the place and paintings of this famous Spanish chivalric warrior named El Cid. And that's what this is based on. That's the story is based on that. But what Corneille does is he takes this myth, these little elements that he has, and he turns it into this wonderful, dramatic, conflicted story about honor and getting in trouble, basically, because of the way that your honor leads you, the way his honor leads him, and how he is a man of honor and he has to stay that way based on these circumstances. So Jeff, let's bring you in to this situation, this conflict of these young lovers or sweethearts, and how they are in trouble because they're put in this weird situation where their fathers are messing them up.
Jeff, could you just talk a little bit about discovering great plays as literature and philosophy? Because we're talking about this play because Leonard Peikoff has done these lectures and come up with this book.
Oh yeah, it's just a thumbnail sketch about it. This was a series of lectures that Leonard Peikoff offered in the early 90s, which covered 8 of his favorite plays in world literature, which he then summarized and analyzed from the perspective of the building blocks of the drama. And what not only the major characters, their conflicts, but also what it was about these conflicts that stood out among their contemporaries as far as plays are concerned, or writers of plays, what stood out in and brought them to the fore as really truly great plays that expressed very distinctive philosophies and worldviews, and did so in the stripped down intensity of the stage, which is basically an environment that gestated out of Greek amphitheaters with Greek versions of light, camera, and action, but evolved into a form where individual voices appear on stage and have to deliver through word and deed and stripped down deed the essence of the conflict that the play considers and concerns itself with. And it does it, and it does so without the benefit of the camera, without the benefit of either television or motion pictures. It takes what you can say in person, directly in front of an audience, to make the issues and heart of the drama come alive.
So one of the things that Peikoff mentions in the lecture or the chapter, if you have the book, is the idea that there are only 4 thinkers in history who had a particular perspective on moral man. And he talks about Aristotle's great-souled man.
And I think it's about as an individual.
Yes, thank you. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because if you have not read this, this is a reason why you should, because you get an image of this type of man that, other than Aristotle's great-souled man, other than Nietzsche's Übermensch, and other than Ayn Rand's ideal man, the other fourth one is the Cornelian hero.
Cornelian was right, yeah.
Yeah, which is this type of hero, and this is the best example of that hero, although there are others from Corneille that is worthy as well. But so for that reason alone, you should read this play, right? That endorsement of there's only 4 men in history who've really created that type of man, 3 men and a woman, I should say, 3 men and a woman who've created that kind of man. And here they are. So that's part of this lecture series. And I found that really inspiring.
And this is all on YouTube, meaning for free. You can go look up Leonard Peikoff, Le Cid, and immediately you will hear Dr. Peikoff deliver this lecture, which is, I feel like it's Peikoff at his prime. I think he's finished Opar by this point. He's probably 60 years old, and he loves talking about theater.
Yeah, he talks about in the story that one of his regrets in the Q&A of Ayn Rand is not talking to her about theater in particular very much. He only talked to her about philosophy, and he was saddened that he never really talked to her much about theater. And there's a good reason. But go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, it's interesting. One of the important points that I think shouldn't be lost on this audience, but I think it's true before whatever audience, is to remember that your concern with, at least as we would understand it, the concern of philosophy is a concern with a guide to action in actual life. And one of the things that the Great Play lecture series offers is an examination of ideas in action in the genre of theater, or rather in the medium of theater, and over a period of history. So you have, Western drama going back to its early roots with the earliest presenters of coherent drama that had coherent ideas that its characters embodied in their action on stage. And he takes that from era to era, analyzing the building blocks, and therefore giving you a chance as a listener to gain ever greater insights into what's
going on. And maybe drama is even a better word to use than theater, because drama gives you, there's conflict, there's characters in conflict, there's characters having internal conflict. Right. And what do you do? How do you make these hard decisions? Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah. And no, I think that's great, jumping off point into the play itself, because I think that's such an important point that I talk to so many objectivists, and I talk to people who are interested in philosophy, and it's like they don't seem to have the literary base. Like Ayn Rand had this view that you couldn't be a philosopher until after you're 40, but I think she also would agree that you need a heavy dose of literature and drama, because you need to see, she has a whole book, Romantic Manifesto, about the importance of art in concretizing these deep metaphysical values that is just, you cannot do it in just abstract terms. So I think that whole idea is a good jumping off point to talking about the play itself and the value of Le Cid. I almost said El Cid again in my head. The value of Le Cid by Corneille and the conflict that you're talking about. So there's this line, I'll start off with this, and you guys could talk about the conflict more. A war is in my heart. Against my honor now, my love takes part. I must avenge a father, lose my love. That's conflict.
Chimène, right? That's the woman.
That's Rodrigue. That's Don Rodrigue. So he has to avenge his father, but they both have similar, because she has to avenge. Yeah, that's why you could confuse that, because the whole situation, the plot theme, the situation is that Shameen and, as Anne was saying, Shameen and Rodrigue love each other. Their fathers both want them to get together, but because of the tempestuous nature of Shameen's father, the Count, Don Gomez or whatever, he slaps the other one in a bout of anger, And then, but the other one's too old to do anything about it. So he goes to his son and says, you have to avenge me. And now his son is in this conflict between honor, which is a big deal back then. We could make an argument. Peikoff does a really good job of modernizing this. Although I would make a tweak. So we could talk about that later, about his, modern story that he has of, he created like a script, a modern Hollywood script synopsis. That's fun to think about. But that's the essence of the conflict, right? Is this honor and passionate love. Would you agree?
What's also another perspective on what you just said and zeroed in on is that the conflict is between two people who are vested in a view of life which makes them fall in love with each other. And in defending their values in life, they run into conflict with each other because they need to take action that is going to undermine and destroy the other person. And so in order for Rodrigue to continue being in love with Shamin, he has to do things that will, be utterly in conflict, dramatic conflict with her, line in the story, and vice versa. And this intense head-to-head, I love you, but I have to kill you, or I have to kill something about you is I think the one of the real key elements of this. The other element I would want to mention is that this is a conflict between two basically good people.
Yes. Everyone's good. Like who would be are there any bad? There's no Iago. There's no, horrible bad person. Even Gomez, he's tempestuous and he probably should not have slapped the elder, but he was spurned and he's not like that was a bad thing to do. Probably it wasn't ideal, but he wasn't evil, right? He gives reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that Peikoff points out is that this is a play written during the Age of Reason. And this is one of the times when you get literal syllogisms, argued on stage, which is just to our minds mind-boggling. Like, I think it's one of the reasons why it's so bizarre to read this is that these characters are actually trying to deduce or induce the right thing to do in this. She means, well, I love him, but he's doing the right,
right.
And she makes these arguments. And to us, we're like, either you do it, or you don't. Like, what are you talking about? How are you doing a syllogism on stage? And that's one of the values of reading great literature of the past, by the way, is the ossification of values to compare with your own culture and how different it is. But Jeff, please, what do you?
I would say, there's several challenges to get to the point where you can just even grasp clearly this conflict. At least I found it so. And that's, you have to, we're reading a play that's a translation of an original work in French, based on a historic figure that's widely known at that time, that's based on a history in Spain. And, I compared, for instance, lines in 3 translations and found that there was real differences and real takeaway differences between each translation. And that adds to the difficulty in cracking the nut of this really interesting story and getting it to the point where you can see clearly with all of the rush of the drama, the conflict between these two people. So it's a little slow going at first. And I'm saying that as a person that's had a lot of experience in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to crack.
So I want to get to that. I just want to give a couple shout outs to the super chats. So we are getting super chats. So thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Mary-Aline. And thank you, Mary-Aline, again.
Mary-Aline.
So thank you, everybody. Keep super chatting for ARCUK, supporting that show and supporting Artful Tuesdays. So we appreciate.
And later on, we're going to be on Clubhouse.
Yeah.
So we'd love for you to join. And we also want to put a plug in for the amazing ARUK early April conference. Weekend and week and all the things that are available
Yeah. So
Kirk, can you tell us a little about that before we
well, I just
jump
yeah,
in?
like oh sorry. So all I know at the moment is Rozzy is putting on some of his own events ahead of time, and then I think it's like you go to the website. I don't remember, like maybe like the first to the third or something like that. ARI is bringing lectures for them, so it'll be a whole week long of things. You could go just for the ARI stuff, just for Rozzy stuff, but really you should go to all of it. I'm actually going to try to go. I'm going to do my best.
You should go. Yaron will be there.
Yaron will be
Lisa Van
there.
Dam will be there. So that's
okay.
Great. Yeah, that's great.
Good. So Jeff, back to you.
To Jeff's point, though, regarding translations, honestly, if you just go and listen to the YouTube thing of this, you'll be fine. Then, if you're inspired, you could go and look for one of the translations. Leonard suggests the Ken Muir, M-U-I-R translation, which is okay. Yeah. I'm a Richard Wilbur fan, so let's put up all the books that we want to put up. So this is the guy who really is fabulous on Moliere. That's Richard Wilbur does rhymed couplets for the comedy of Moliere, but he has a translation of the Cid in here. But it is, and Leonard does a really good job talking about when you're reading a play, you really have to use your imagination because you're reading. He gives you the example of a musical score.
Oh, yes.
Do you think, Jeff, would you agree that's a good analogy?
It's an excellent analogy.
What's the analogy? Can you
just
express it?
If you're, maybe this will break it down. It's like evaluating a building, a structure by looking at the blueprint and expecting to walk in and feel the envelopment of a space and what its impact is upon you emotionally by forecast, layers and layers removed from the actual experience. So it's reading a blueprint, it's imagining what the building would be like. It's, well, certainly in score reading. I actually went online looking for, because I didn't know it very well, the Jules Massenet's adaptation of the Cid, which he produced, which was produced
an opera
in France in the 19th century, had something of a popularity, and then disappeared from the repertoire. But I was able to nonetheless use that as a way to leverage myself into the story more, to give it more.
Great. So that is an opera. And the next chapter that we're going to talk about is on Don Carlos, which Verdi will create into a fabulous opera, Don Carlo. And that's an interesting way to enter. I do want to encourage people, we get discouraging about play reading. And I think play reading is you're making the own movie in your mind. You absolutely can do it, but it does require imagination.
Yeah, and let's go through an example that Peikoff actually gets in the Q&A that I think is very useful, because you're right, and it's not something that will come automatically or even naturally to you. It takes a little bit of practice, but it can be a very enjoyable process if you read a play and you try to imagine the characters and what's going on, because it's very flaccid on the page. But what you need to do as a good reader of dramatic literature is to make it come alive in your head. And then, of course, for me, one of the pleasures has been when I do get to see a version, I get to kind of compare, like, well, what do they do that I didn't do? Is that better or is that worse? And you get to compare how would Anne produce this versus how did I do it in my head? And that's, by the way, that's why I think there's so much vehement criticism and people get so passionate about this stuff. It's like, that's not how he is. And people get so angry. And because you get such connected to these humans. And so the example that comes up in the Q&A of Discover or 8th Grade Plays lecture is an individual in the crowd asks Peikoff about the Gomez Rodriguez, who's the father name? I just forgot his name. Diego. Something like that, Diego, the father and the two fathers. Gomez is he slaps the elder father, and the questioner in the lecture series asks, why doesn't Gomez just fight himself and die honorably? Why does he put it on his son to do that? And, Peikoff, of course, gives a brilliant answer. He talks about pettifogging and he gives you a definition. I mean, it's wonderful. I don't know how he comes up with this stuff at the top. I mean, he's genius, right? But he, the thing that I think is important is when I pictured that at first, like that was not a question I had, because I pictured Gomez as like a 75, 80-year-old, very feeble, wise, but strong and upright man. Because he actually, if you read the text I have, he pulls out his sword. And I pictured it like, like a shaking old man with his cane holding, and then you have a 40-year-old man who with a sword and like and he just like disarms them with barely a flick of his, and it's like, imagine me, a 300-pound man getting slapped by a 80-year-old man, and then I punch him in the face as hard as I can. What would you think of me? Be like, wait, dude, why did you do that? And so for me, like the visualizing of that, this long rant is about visualizing that moment was so powerful, and I really understood it because I imagined it, and that's kind of what Peikoff talks about.
Kirk, you're a big poetry guy, and I think of poems because of my background, reading them aloud.
Yes,
so
you have to read
I've
it
been
aloud.
reading a sonnet a day.
Oh,
I'm up to number 35. And when I read them aloud and I don't know what the hell they're saying. And then I go and look up the glossary and I look up another glossary and I listen to Patrick Stewart on law. But reading it aloud is just so empowering because it does something to your mind and your body and your soul. So reading plays aloud is something that is really fun. And I encourage people to consider doing that.
Now, I had a
go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
Music instructor at Berkeley that is a musicianship person and said, to all of us in the classroom, whatever your piano level is, every one of you should take out the Chopin etudes and do the first measure. Just work note by note through that, and you'll take away so much just by doing that much. You'll get a flavor, you'll get the technical issue that is being solved, or giving you the opportunity to get further insight into the composition if you're just going to stand back and listen to it. But it's that actual doing that, in the case of reading a sonnet, even if you have to go to the glossary afterwards, or just doing one measure of a concert etude, it's so enriching.
I wonder if we have some French people or French-speaking people who are watching, who, probably know this as a stodgy old play. There is a version of it in French on YouTube that's pretty contemporary. It looks to me something done in the past 10 years or so. And it's haven't you seen it, Jeff? I think you saw it, Kirk. It's very stripped down.
I didn't watch it, but yeah.
But it's in French, and it is fun to hear the language, to hear how beautiful the language sounds.
I think that's a great idea to do, even if you just take the first first exchange between Chimène and her
Elvire.
Yeah, and just do that.
Yeah. I wish there was a French version that had English subtitles, so you could hear the sounds, right?
But
because there is
also
a beauty.
Goes to show you how obscure these plays are that Leonard is picking. They are the masterworks of theater. Yeah. But because we have sort of pushed aside, it's too fake. People aren't heroic like this. They are only surviving because Leonard has opened the treasure chest.
Well, let's talk about
let us peek in.
Let's talk about their heroism. What makes Chimène and Rodrigo heroes? Why are they, these four great thinkers of all time, Aristotle, Nietzsche, Rand, and Corneille? What is Corneille doing special with Rodrigo and Chimène? Let's use them as the prime examples. And I could start, but what do you guys, take maybe Rodrigo. What makes him so grand and heroic?
Go ahead, Ayn.
Okay.
They act on what they know to be true. So there's no sort of like, well, this is really uncomfortable and it's going to make my life difficult. And, who am I to do this? And so on. I just think of contemporary people who are facing dilemmas in which they know what they should do, but they don't do or say what they should do. And here are characters that go full force, even if it means their own happiness is going to be at risk. I just want to say one thing about both those characters. In this reading, what really got into my head was how young they are.
Mhm.
They're like 20.
Yeah.
So in the plays, you don't see them that young because actors in their 30s or mid 30s are playing them, but they haven't married yet. So they're really quite young and they have this belief in what is right and they do what is right.
Yeah, they're idealists, and I think they're unflinching in a way that to a modern ear who's not used to unflinching heroism is very off-putting sometimes. Like Shamin in particular, but also Rodrigo, like he beats everybody. Or for instance, when Rodrigo goes up against Gomez, when I first read it, I thought the conflict of the whole story was going to be whether the father would destroy the son, who he had said, I love him for a good match, because we don't know how good Rodrigo is. So just to kind of spoil it for everybody, Rodrigo becomes El Cid or the Cid later, which is a name he's given by his enemies, which are the Moors or the Muslims, who he defeats and brings back 2 kings, and they call him the Cid, which is a kind of bastardization of Said, which is is what's Arabic or whatever for master or lord. And the point is that when I first read it, when Rodrigo was going up against Gomez, Shamin's father, I thought Gomez, who is the great warrior of his era, he is the greatest warrior at the beginning of the play. We don't know how good Rodrigo is. I figured he was going to die. I was like, oh no, that's the conflict. And then he like beats him supposedly handily, right? And then he becomes greater and greater and greater. It's like, and that's part of it. And also, I don't know if Rodrigo knows if he's good enough to beat Gomez, like if he's tested, but he's going to do it anyway. He's going to fight anyway. Like when he goes to battle with the Moors, he fully expects to die, but he becomes even greater, right? And then he won't fight the champion of Chamin because he figures, I'm going to kill this guy now, and it's not right because she is correct. This is where the conflict comes in. Chamin wants to avenge her father, but she loves Rodrigo, right? That's the challenge. And Rodrigo wants to overcome this, but he can't, because what she loves about him is how moral he is. He is so moral by acting in honor in her honor society of 12th century Castile in Spain. This is the society they live in, and he's the epoch of that. So if he betrays it, she can't love him anymore. Jeff, yeah.
I have to admit that in my early reading of the play, I was shut out by this notion of honor. I just didn't, it didn't land initially as a full-blown concept. I had to infer what it meant by observing the actions of Rodrigue and Chamin over the course of the play and their interactions with each other. It just wasn't, it didn't unfold like a tent initially as in the first scene. In fact, the most realistic perspective, or the most apprehendable to me, was the perspective of the, I'm going to mispronounce, the Infanta.
Infanta, right. Yeah, the princess.
And her sense of loss, of a love, which I could understand and relate to, because it didn't require as much translation, and it wasn't.
She loves Rodrigo, just to be clear.
Yes, that's true. And her understanding or admission that she has this love for a person that is below her class, and she cannot actualize that love, and that she's trying to facilitate his union with Shaman, I think, is action on her part that I could pick up immediately and start gripping and pulling meaning from, that added up to an insight into her. The other characters, for me, I had to take longer with, because you know, the minute I hear, for me personally, and this is as a 20th century, 21st century man, human being speaking, for Western person, not just California, but the West. When I'm hearing someone say honor,
14th century,
and I'm hearing something, you know, you have to defend the honor of something. It's so infantilized in my mind, because I think of like honor codes among warring gangs and warring, you know, fiefdoms, and people in contemporary television that are observing honor codes of silence and so forth. That's where that kind of cultural cache immediately comes into mind when I hear such words as
that's interesting.
honor.
I mean, I had a similar dilemma about honor, but I guess I'm stuck with sort of the 19th and early 20th century in plays, you know, you have to defend that lady's honor and so on. I thought it was fun that Leonard actually said the love of honor or the honor of love. Which I thought was an interesting way to turn it. But I understand that, Jeff. I have to say one thing that I thought was really funny. Leonard mentions that Voltaire says that Rodrigue offers too many times to try to kill himself.
Right.
He offers suicide too much. Yeah, he does. It's like 6 times.
I felt the same way. It's like, again? You just did this. You said it before. Now you said it. But now, please let me kill myself.
Yeah.
So
he does it too much. That's a good point.
I do want to have some folks get together and read some of this aloud, even if it's on Zoom.
Yeah.
I was saying this to Kirk and Jeff before we started, because on the page, it is difficult and it can get a little stilted. And I'm so glad that Leonard is, you know, opening up the can with the can opener to get this out, because it is it's something that I wouldn't pursue on my own, even though I know it from the history of theater as a very important moment in the history of theater.
And one thing about the reading, I think reading it would help bring to life the unique perspective that both these characters have on the topic of honor, and you can begin to unpack what it really means. And in Leonard's Peikoff's lectures, the meaning that he ascribes to honor is wider than a code of medieval ethics, which has been lost in time, or which is maybe taken over in my context by a greater familiarity with Baroque painting or Baroque music, you know, a kind of similar period in art history. But he's suggesting that rather than honor, think of philosophy, think of morality, think of what it is to invest in a worldview, and then to implement it, and to do it step by step and have conflict by conflict as you take that step. That's where you really get to know these people. And I think reading them out aloud and bringing them to life, even in your own living room, could be hugely valuable.
Well, and Peikoff gives us a lot of great tools and tips for doing that. Again, get the book, guys. Start reading it. Seriously, it will change your life. Because you know, you're mentioning about this honor code and how he helps you understand it as morality. And he gives you lots of examples of how this works, where you have to understand the kind of, you know, one way of approaching this kind of literature is understanding the honor code that these individuals are living that is imposed on them. And this is actually a criticism that Peikoff gives, or it's almost like a straitjacket that Corneille is in, where it's like, you know, that he's working within this code of honor that they have to. Peikoff tries to help you as a modern person unlock that straitjacket to understand the universality of human action in moral terms that they are acting on and that they are really going for. And he gives a really good, many good examples. One that stood out for me was a question I'm going to ask you two, and I know, and everybody listening. in the honor code era, a slap in the, if Jeff and I were having dinner, and Jeff and I have had dinner before, and we've had like, some pretty intense arguments and discussions, and
Really?
we're like, no, it's not like this. Oh yeah. We go after him, man.
Oh yeah.
And we got upset a couple times, like, all right. And if I just grabbed a glove and went, now in medieval times, the response would be a duel to the death. That's the rule, right? And so be careful who you slap, because it's a duel to the death.
Yeah.
Now, how do we translate that today? Like, and now Peikoff asked a wonderful question that I'm asking you, which is, in an objectivist context, how would you react? What would be the response to a slap to the face like that in a moment of anger? And he gave a couple of, scenarios, but I don't know if you remember that moment, or if you
I
have your
don't
own
remember
answer.
that moment. That's interesting.
Okay.
I mean, I would just never talk to the person again. That would be,
That's
you are
it.
dead to me. But, and I suppose one could do context, right? It would depend on who the person was.
That's what he said.
What was happening at the
context.
moment and so on.
Yeah.
But Jeff, what do you think?
What do you think, Jeff?
Well, a slap can be symbolic of a line drawn in the sand over and a crossing over of that line.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I can, go back to maybe some spirited discussions that Kirk and I have had.
Oh, he wanted to slap me in the face?
Well, no, where I felt like
kidding.
lines are being drawn in the sand, and both parties were not willing to or rather, both parties were approaching the line, knowing that there was a border that might be difficult to cross. But I think it's through questions and trying to establish the other person's context and thinking outside of your particular square that enables, the slap in the face to not occur.
Well, yeah.
Well,
hopefully that's what
I think it would be helpful, Kirk, if you could remember to share Leonard's movie idea.
Yeah.
Do you think you could just sketch that?
Yeah. So the movie idea, this is a kind of his way of helping you understand how this story written in 1600 can be very universally applicable. I think this is a fun exercise to do. I've started doing my own. I think I would do it differently than Peikoff. And his example is a young hotshot district attorney who's in love with a young woman whose father is an old, very aged man dying. And I might be mixing something up. And the DA's father is I'm sorry, I'm reversing it. So
you don't know, but you don't know at the beginning when he sets it up.
Yeah, but he does tell. I'm just trying to remember the stories, but it's basically, I believe the girl's father is a doctor, the man's father is an old man dying, and the doctor performs euthanasia because of a requested. The father of the DA requested it because he was dying, and he wanted it, but the DA has to prosecute the doctor because it's the law, right? And she loves him because he's a righteous district attorney. He's very righteous. And that's why she loves him. And it's very clear that's why she loves him. But yet her father, now she's in this dilemma, and he's in a dilemma. Does he go full force and really prosecute to the full force of the law? Or does he kind of play it easy in order to let her go by? But he has to, because that's why she loves him. And that's why he loves himself, which is what, so if she stops, like if he does compromise, this is why it becomes really complicated in the story. If he compromises on this and she still loves him, then he will no longer love her, because that's not why he loves her. He loves her because she recognizes in him this value of righteousness, of unbending, unyielding righteousness.
See, I think it's a really good analogy.
It is a very good
I want to know
story.
Kirk's.
Well, so mine is not fleshed out. It just occurred to me today, but I would set it something like cops in Boston. And maybe, I haven't figured out who would be what would the fathers would be exactly, except one would have to be like a mob boss or something, or maybe not the problem, like not a mob boss, but maybe he does something illegal for some reason. Not a mob boss is too, they all have to be good people is the issue.
Okay.
So I only thought about this earlier, but I think with cops, you have an honor code kind of built in, especially American cops in Boston, like they're in movies, and people, when they watch a cop show, they, especially a Boston one, they kind of expect that level of honor there, or some level of honor. Like if someone, gets in trouble at a bar, there's a response you're supposed to have. Like you're supposed to fight, right, with fists and maybe even to the death, right? Like that's already there in a modern setting. But I love his example. This is just like where my mind.
Yeah. I was just curious. Curious.
And I have to play with it a little bit more to think about who the fathers would be, because that's important. Like that the fathers are not horrible, evil people. So the doctor who euthanizes the other father, he's doing what he thinks is morally right, which is this man asked for it. He's suffering. They don't know that a cure is available. Now Peikoff puts a twist and he says a month later a cure does come out, which makes it even more complicated. But yeah, so it's a great example.
I do want to pull one thread about that. Peikoff says that these people are not born this way. That Cornet's heroes actually become more heroic through the sort of what the school of moral greatness is, what one of the translators suggested. So I wanted to bring that up.
No, that's wonderful. And I think like the ambiguity of the ending, right, is the fact that there's a year-long episode that's going to be happening where Rodrigo is supposed to go out and essentially conquer the world. That's what he says he's going to do. And as I was mentioning earlier, he starts off as an untrained or unpracticed or untested warrior at the opening. And by the end, he's El Cid, right? He's the Cid. He's the warrior. He's the conqueror of two kings. And yet Shamin still hasn't forgiven him for murdering his father, which is kind of understandable to some degree. Like, how can you forgive somebody at what level? But the idea is that he's going to keep going down that path of becoming more of a conqueror. And she's going to keep going down the path of being more of a moral, absolutist. And that's why it's a little bit ambiguous. Like, is it going to resolve in a year?
Well, the way I read it, it was like, look, the king said, you have a year, you've made this commitment, in terms of the challenger and all that, and you're going to have to do it. It reminded me of Shakespeare's play called Love's Labour's Lost, where the lovers at the end have to sort of separate and sort of, figure yourselves out. But then when you come together, you can be together. But I found the ending really unsatisfying. Like, I was like, oh no, come on.
As did Peikoff. Yeah. How about you, Jeff? Did you find the ending unsatisfying?
I probably at this point am not well enough acquainted with the play to fully answer that, because I think I need more time with it. But it is the case that I'm going to pay attention to the instruction given by the king and what is implied by that in terms of what he thinks these two people are capable of. And if they're really going out into the field to self-reflect and evolve in keeping with the convictions that they've already presented and acted upon in the play, then that would be a satisfying conclusion. But I'm not quite there yet.
Well, at least it wasn't, no, really, now I'll kill myself. That could be one of the endings. We're like, oh no.
Right.
So go ahead, Ann, I'm sorry.
I just was going to ask Jeff, so you said earlier you listened to a recording. Was it the one that's really, really, really old?
I listened to an abbreviated recording of that was an old radio program of great plays. The Chesterton, I believe. Yes.
I listened to some of that too.
And
it was just a little old for me, but yeah.
It was enough and it was an adaptation. There were omissions, but relatively, I think the play is it's like 66 or so pages in standard edition. So it's on the short side.
It's a quick read
as far as plays are concerned. And the French version, I believe, is about 2 hours. I don't know how it's staged, but the Chesterton is a little over an hour.
Great, thank you.
I'm pronouncing that correct.
Yeah, you are.
Okay.
Kirk, what were you going to say? I interrupted you.
No, I was curious about if you remember. I'm trying to find it in the book. Peikoff talks about the French scholarship done on this play and how reading it as a 17th century French language expert, that there is something he says about the ending that does make it a little more clear, that is lost in translation. And I'm trying to remember or find where it is exactly.
It's the penultimate paragraphs of the lecture, like the last 5 or so. He goes into that.
But yeah, so there's I don't want to take time. We can maybe look for it for the Clubhouse. Yeah, we could try for Clubhouse if we can find it.
And the Q&A was a lot of fun on this.
Yeah, the Q&A was great. Because part of what we haven't really even talked about, and we can start wrapping up with final thoughts here, is just the idea of this great-souled man, this self-directed man of free will, who he doesn't accept his moral code. That's one thing that's different about Corneille versus Rand, for instance. So the moral code is imposed on him by the system he's born into. But what he does do is he accepts it and acts on it wholeheartedly, not half-butted, but wholeheartedly, whole-butted, right? Gene Walters, thank you for your super chat, by the way.
Yay! Thank you, Gene.
So yeah, there's a very good discussion in the discussion thread as well of the YouTube. So thank you, everybody.
So can I throw one thing before you get into that? What is the takeaway for the modern writer, not the listener, not the audience member? What are some of the takeaways for someone who is approaching drama today, and from reading this play?
And do you have?
For me, Jeff, I have to say, as a writer, I feel it's about go to the nth degree. Don't be afraid to be realistic and nits and namby-pamby and whatever. It's go all out in terms of making those characters deep and big, even if they're 20 years old. That's what I got out of it. What would you say, Kirk?
I believe, one, the exercise of modernizing, even as a synopsis for yourself, is understanding the plot scenario. How would you make it? That is a good way to train yourself to think like a dramatist. And how could you make this as dramatic as possible on the screen or in literature? And so I do that all the time with this gentleman, Hawthorne. I'm finishing up a story now, a novella that is based on it's inspired by. And I think as a writer, that's a great exercise to dissect very, minutely and in big terms, one of the greatest plays of all time, and then do it yourself in your own way with and that'll help you. For me, it'll help you by kind of scaffolding onto what they've done. And then you can, pick up some of their tips and tricks.
What's the story from Hawthorne now that you open that can of worms?
Rappaccini's daughter.
I knew it.
Yeah, the one that I have is called Lazarus 1. It's one of my quarantine tales. And it was it's very tragic because I was in a very dark place when I started writing them during the beginning of the quarantine.
Wow.
But yeah, so it's my kind of understanding of this myth that Hawthorne is working with, and what's my take on it. But I think I would love to do one for Corneille here, and these great soul. I'm a little, to be honest, as a writer, I'm quite intimidated and terrified to some degree to do a great souled man type character. Although I'd love to do one day, and I have one for a female great souled woman that is kind of motivating me. But anyway, Jeff, let's close off with your answer to that question, and then everybody, you could join us. We're going to go to Clubhouse after this in just a few minutes. So what is your takeaway as a writer?
Well, look and absorb deeply and give the work a lot of room to unfold, and try to consult those glossaries, consult those different translations, because what you get from that is your mind. It's like taking a snapshot of something from different angles, and then eventually you come away with a mosaic and an overall understanding in different limited pieces composed of that, of the whole, and it's very satisfying. It gives it stretches you, and when you face your own blank page, which is never blank in my opinion, there's always
I envy that.
Well,
Exactly. It's like, wow.
I mean,
Good for you.
it's better to put it in musical terms. I always think of any creative process as like dropping a needle on a turntable that's constantly going. And when you're creative, you drop it and then you pull it up, and whatever you got, you edit and do something with. Well, tackling some other work that's really tough, that throws all these challenges. Either you don't get into it initially, or you have to pay attention. Just gives you so many pleasures, and it gives you so much added prowess as a writer and thinker.
Agreed.
I guess I want to say one thing
Anne,
about
please.
classicism before we go, and that is this play is written in a very limited palette. You have to have 24 hours. You can't have any sex on stage. Can't have any violence on stage.
I almost threw it out for that.
And I mean, we all, know that TV and film always have these sort of constrictions about what you're supposed to do in the first 30 pages and all that. But here's a person that creates, just a whole world, but using those limitations and creating something kind of wonderful out of it. So next time, though, it's Schiller.
Yes, so start reading
Don
now.
Carlos. So, and that's a longer play.
This is the longest play, according to.
You might want to take a few sittings.
According
but definitely
to
read Peikoff on Schiller, because he has many, many, many plays that are really worth looking at.
Schiller
Thank you, Kirk,
great.
for making this happen.
Thank you, everybody, and
Thank
we'll
you very
see you
much.
next time.
Really enjoyed it.
All right.